there's been a marked increase in the number of people who claim to have had contact with alien beings. Some of them tell disturbing stories of abuse and claim to have real physical scars from the close encounters they found terrifying. When it comes to UFO encounters, Hollywood has had a field day. The movies have portrayed aliens as comical spacemen or as benevolent creatures. But the movies we love to laugh at have nothing to do with reality. Reality is a woman named Vickie Landrum.
I'd go to the grocery store, and people would make fun of me. I'd try to go to church, and the pastor asked me not to come.
Vickie Landrum has struggled to convince the government and the public that contact with extraterrestrials has left her scarred and riddled with disease.
It's not just a light in the sky or somebody thinks they saw something. A real serious case, you know they've seen something. It changes people's lives. They're never the same afterwards if they've had a close encounter or if they've been injured.
Houston, 1980. They were driving on a deserted road. Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum, and her 7-year-old grandson, Colby. They claim to have had a UFO encounter that left more than memories burned in the minds of these 3 victims.
I kept screaming for Betty to get back in the car. So finally she come to get back in the car, and when she caught hold of that handle, it burned her ring into her finger. That car was that hot.
They all had stomach aches, they all had diarrhea, they all vomited, they were all burned, they all developed sores later. They all lost some hair. Mrs. Cash, most of her hair, Mrs. Landrum less, and the boy even less. But in each case, something happened that is typical of radiation exposure.
My eyes were burned so till they swelled till I couldn't hardly see. I couldn't see how to read or watch TV or do nothing. And every time I'd get out in the sun, it'd be big blisters, and I had sores all over my arms. After this happened to me, well, I couldn't work. I didn't have no friends to talk to. So it just made me like a hermit.
The Cash-Landrum case, as I call it, to me is a very significant case because we have a situation where we had a very large flying machine that came over the road that actually left marks on the road, so you know where it was exactly. It left burns on the trees. It left burns on the people. It changed their physiology. It's a composite of many UFO cases all rolled into one with very horrifying results.
While campaigning for the presidency in 1976, Jimmy Carter claimed he had seen a UFO. Carter vowed to make all government materials on UFO sightings available to the public. 20 years earlier, Andy Florio, a big band musician, had an encounter with a UFO in Arizona and experienced burns similar to Vickie Landrum's. Now, he wants the government to make good on Jimmy Carter's promise.
Jimmy Carter made a commitment to the American people that he would release all UFO secrecy to the American people if he became president, which he did not do. As a citizen and so forth, and as a victim of a UFO, I'm madder than hell. That's all there is to it. My elbows burned me 37 years, man. It's going to burn me the rest of my life. I know it. It's burning me now.
There are many secrets in this world kept by various governments and various peoples. In this particular case, if someone would just say what happened, whether it was extraterrestrial or it was a military experiment or whatever, we would all rest easier in knowing that it's something that's known.
Although the government claims no responsibility, an Army colonel was sent to investigate Vickie Landrum's claims.
He questioned me, and I answered him, and then he told me that people had died for listening what I was trying to do.
Some investigators suggest that the colonel's subtle threat was linked to helicopters Vickie saw surrounding the UFO.
The helicopters came from different directions. There were groups of them that came in waves. One group came from the southwest, one came in from the east, and they all converged on the same area. Several of the helicopters flew around this object like they were trying to hem it in.
the government wanted to experiment on something, and they taking the lives of people to do it.
Our system is not set up to explain the unexplainable. People all over this country are mysteriously injured, even killed every year. Vickie Landrum believes some of them may have met with deadly alien forces. Because she is seriously ill, Vickie won't be silenced. She speaks out in the hope that others will not suffer her terrible fate.
One of the most intriguing cases that Schuessler and his group are investigating involves these women, Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum, and Vickie's grandson, Colby. In December of 1980, the three of them encountered an unusual object on the outskirts of Houston.
We had been driving out this country road, which it is a very desolate area, and all of a sudden we seen this object. So I didn't know whether to stop, to back up, keep going, or what. So we just kept driving. We thought, well, maybe it's an air balloon or something, you know, weather balloon or something. But the closer we got, we could tell that either it was going to be us or it, because it kept getting lower and getting hotter.
And this object come down almost to the treetops, almost ahead of us, and I screamed for Betty to stop. And I think if she hadn't stopped and we went on under it, we would have burned up. I got out in the car, Colby and me, for about, I guess, a minute or two, and he was screaming like he was trying to get away from me, and then pulling me back in the car, and I got back in the car, and Betty walked to the head of the car.
I thought it was the end of time, because I've always been taught the Bible says the world will be destroyed by fire, hell and brimstone. Well, how did I know that the hell and brimstone wasn't right there with it? And as hot as it was, if hell is any hotter, God forbid I want to live a good life, because it was just almost unbearable.
I kept trying to calm Colby, and I couldn't. I had to tell him something that would calm him, and I said, if you see this big man come out of it, it'd be Jesus.
Well, I just had a feeling to look up in the sky. Then I looked around a little bit more and I saw that object. It looked like a diamond. It lit up the whole sky.
It was a grayish, metallic looking color, but yet the flames that was throwing out was a reddish, yellowish looking glow.
Besides the strange object, they all claim to have seen several helicopters hovering around it.
Just about the minute that I got up close enough to really make the shape of the object, whatever it is, the helicopters were there.
We was amazed at, you know, what kind of helicopters there were. We were about scared to death. The double rotary kind of helicopters, I'd never saw one before.
Whatever they saw that night, the physical impact was immediate. Within hours, they were suffering from severe headaches, diarrhea, and vomiting. Betty Cash had the worst symptoms.
Her main problem at that time was severe headache, swelling of the face, swelling of the eyelids, and the swelling of the skull, that is the top of the head.
The fear of ridicule kept Betty from telling about her UFO encounter. But weeks later, when patches of her hair started falling out, she told her doctor about the incident. Specialists were brought in, including a dermatologist and a radiologist, to run tests. They all turned up negative. John Schuessler and his group started their own investigation several months later. Despite the inconclusive medical reports, Schuessler believes that all three victims received some kind of radiation exposure caused by the UFO.
It's a package of symptoms that all three had, and all three being different kinds of people. That's the significant thing, from their age, the past history, medical history, etc. But they all had common symptoms. The common symptoms all manifested themselves right after the incident, starting within hours.
And what about the helicopters that were supposedly hovering around the object? Schuessler's investigators found other witnesses who saw them.
The helicopters must have been military if they existed. That has to be a given. There are no civilian operations of CH-47 Chinook-type helicopters in the Houston or Gulf Coast area.
Major Dennis Hare is a commander with the National Guard at Ellington Air Force Base near Houston. He says none of the Chinooks in his unit flew the night of the incident.
I personally was not up in the air that night, and to the best of my knowledge, no member of my unit or the aircraft that's under my command were up in the air on that particular date.
A fleet of helicopters, an unidentified flying object, and 3 victims who were injured by it. What do they all add up to? No one is sure. Schuessler and his group think that one possible explanation is that our government may have been testing a secret aircraft that night, powered by some type of microwave propulsion system. The craft may have gone out of control, almost touching down when Betty, Vickie, and Colby saw it.
They have what would normally be seen from a heavy dose of microwave and possibly an X-ray component. And we do know that pulsed microwave gives off an X-ray component.
But if the military is involved, they deny it.
Citizens of the United States were subjected to chemical exposures, radiation exposures, and various other things over the past 30 years at different times in the interest of research or military operations. And a lot of those people kept saying, hey, look, I was hurt. Believe me, I was hurt. And everybody said, you're crazy. It couldn't have happened.
As for Betty and Vickie, they still suffer from hypersensitivity to heat.
I do expect them to take care of my medical bills and what I have had to go through with and what I'm still going through with and what I may have to continue for years.
I don't believe in the little green men and all of that stuff from outer space. But if it's something that people don't know about, and it slipped in here and did that to us, and the government say they don't know about it, when they had the helicopters up there, we in a terrible shape. Because if it can happen to us, it could happen to a whole city.
A postscript to the case. Vickie and Betty have filed suit against the federal government, attempting to win compensation for their injuries. They remain firmly convinced that whatever it was they saw, it was attached to the United States military. After pressure from a Texas congressman, the U.S. Air Force sent its own special investigator to look into the matter. His report states that he was unable to find any connection whatsoever between the UFO and any branch of the U.S. military. And so the case remains unsolved, but it does raise some questions. Is it possible that some unidentified flying objects could be secret U.S. military test planes? And if so, what recourse do citizens have if they are injured by them?
For proof that flying saucers do exist, some critics demand more than just the accounts of those who have had close encounters of the first kind, visual sightings. Even when first-kind encounters are reinforced by photographs, they fail to satisfy the need for physical evidence. This woman claims that she has had a close encounter of the second kind. A second-kind encounter is defined by its having physical evidence. Vickie Landrum, along with her grandson Colby Lee, alleges that they, along with Betty Cash, were on their way home from a bingo game when they encountered something they had never seen before. The alleged event took place on December 28, 1980. Vickie and Colby were driving in Betty's car on Highway 1485, 30 miles from the Houston airport, and only 37 miles from NASA's American Space Headquarters.
Colby Lee saw a light, and he kept asking us what the light was. And he kept pulling my face around and asking me, "Mama, what is it?" And I said, "Honey, I don't know." And Betty said, I believe it's getting closer. And I says, well, it kind of looks like it, but we had no idea that we were going to get hurt.
I would say within an instant or so, all of us noticed it because it lit up the entire sky. There was no way you could have missed it.
It looked like the woods were being set on fire. And inside the car, it was so hot till my handprint is yet on the dashboard of Betty's car.
They got out on their side of the car. I stepped out on mine. I stood behind the car door for just a second or so, and I walked toward the front of the automobile. I stood there for just a short time, I don't know how long, trying to see what I could figure this object out to be.
It was diamond-shaped. It didn't mean it was sharp up here and sharp down here. It was kind of round, and the fire come out the bottom of it.
But here was this huge object and flames shooting from it. And they weren't just small flames. They were gushing from it.
And Colby was hanging on to me. And he was trying to get, he started pulling away from me, and I pushed him back in the car, and I got inside the car and put my arm around him and hugged him up real close to me.
We thought it was the end of time.
I says, Colby, don't be afraid. I said, if you see a man, it'll be Jesus. And I said, he'll come to carry us to a better place. He will not hurt you.
It was just burning. It was just too much heat. I could not tolerate it. So Vickie screamed and begged for me to get back in the car. Well, I did, but I had to use the end of my leather jacket in order to open my car door to get back in. That's just how hot it was.
And when the object lifted and slowly moved over to the right of us, her and Colby saw some helicopters.
There were so many of them, it sounded like a tornado.
And we counted 23. I counted 22, really. But Colby said, there's one more. And I said, yeah, baby, that makes 23.
And there were helicopters on both sides and also over the top of the object, or like they were trying to hem it in.
The only apparent proof the women have for what happened to them is the illness they claim they suffered as a result of the encounter. It is the record of these illnesses that made this an encounter of the second kind.
My eyes were burned so till they would swell, and they were tearing till I could lay down at night, and the next morning my pillow would be completely wet, and I couldn't hardly see anything.
Vickie was treated for burns, and she and Colby Lee suffered long periods of nausea. Betty Cash was hospitalized immediately after the event. She suffered severe hair loss and was also treated for burns and nausea. Since then, she has been hospitalized several times.
And the first time that I went into the hospital, they were treating us as burns. But then, after they found out really what had happened, then they started to treating us as radioactive burns. And since, I have had cancer.
Betty's hospital records do not explicitly state that she was treated for radioactive burns. They do state, however, that she exhibited the symptoms similar to someone who might have been exposed to a radioactive element. Betty further maintains that she had no cancer history previous to the alleged encounter. Her records do confirm, however, that she does now have the disease.
No, I'm not well, by no means. I wish, I pray, that I could be.
With the help of Peter Gersten, the New York attorney for Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, the two women have sued the government to find out what it was they encountered that night. Was it a UFO, or an American weapon gone awry, or something else?
I believe the story is a hoax. There is absolutely no evidence. The women's story is supported only by the claim of Betty Cash that she had serious health problems after the alleged incident.
From my review of the Cash-Landrum case, I would say that there's no question that an event took place, that those people were near something that was emitting radiation. I don't think it was an alien spacecraft, frankly. I think it was a nuclear-powered aircraft. That's why all the helicopters, it's standard practice if there's a classified system around. There are guys ready to go there to keep somebody else from getting that should it crash.
The facts are that the U.S. Defense Department investigated. They could not locate 22 twin-rotor helicopters that could possibly have been flying in that area. And in fact, as Colonel Saran, who made the investigation, told me, he said, Phil, this occurred over the Christmas-New Year's holiday. He said, you couldn't get that many helicopters. You couldn't get a military operation into the air over the Christmas-New Year's holiday unless the nation was at war.
The object was there. It existed. There's no question about that. What's interesting is that for the first time, the government has suggested that it wasn't theirs, that it was possibly a true UFO. And nowhere has the government ever admitted, other than this basic document that we've gotten from 1948, that UFOs exist.
I love this country and for all it stands for. But I wish they would tell us the truth.
It was a bizarre close encounter of the second kind experienced by our next guests, Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum. Betty, Vickie, thank you for making the trip here tonight. Welcome to our show. Tell me, what happened to you that night?
It was a very cold night. Vickie and I and her grandson were coming back from playing bingo. Suddenly, little Colby noticed a bright light in the sky above the pine trees. A tremendous amount of heat was coming from this diamond-shaped thing. Fire was coming out of the bottom of it. When it moved, it made a swishing sound, and there was a beeping the entire time, a deafening beeping that I still hear in my mind at night.
All three of us got out of the car, and Colby and I got right back in.
I just stood there, terrified, for about 10 minutes. The object lit up the surrounding pine woods like it was daylight, and I was burning, my skin was burning.
Well, you must have been terrified. How long did the craft hover over you?
Oh, about 20 minutes. Fire was coming out of the bottom like a blowtorch. It lifted up and then flew over the trees.
That was when we saw the helicopters come out.
The helicopters?
Colby County, 23 of them.
And I understand, in fact, you later identified them as CH-47 Chinook military helicopters.
Yes, it seemed as if they were trying to escort the craft somewhere. It looked like they were about to collide. The roar sounded like a tornado. When we got home, I washed Colby off and put him to bed. When the water touched his skin, he cried out like he had been burned, as if he had been in the sun too long.
And I was too sick to work the next day. My eyes swelled closed and welts appeared on my face and head. I thought I was going to die. Vickie came and took me to the emergency room of the hospital. They treated me like a burn patient. Over the next few days, I kept losing big patches of skin on my face, and about half my hair fell out. They kept me in the hospital over a month with no improvement.
It seems to me it takes remarkable inner strength to survive an ordeal like that. How are you doing now?
I have cancer. I was operated on in March 1983, and the doctors could not say if they got it all. Now, some days I'm okay, other days are terrible.
Has the government ever expressed a willingness to take responsibility for this thing?
No, and I'm mad as hell, and disappointed with the government of our United States.
Well, I don't blame you, Miss Cash. And Ms. Landrum, thank you for joining us in Washington. I think you two are extraordinarily courageous ladies.
Thank
you.
We'd
like you to, thank you. We'd like you to see this exclusive videotape of a man we know only as Falcon. We asked him what the truth was concerning your case.
The Cash-Landrum Incident, the craft that was observed was a alien craft piloted by military aircraft pilots. Although they had been trained and were somewhat familiar with the craft, they found that the aircraft did not respond to certain controls. They radioed that they thought the craft was going to crash. Standard procedures for the military in a situation where an aircraft was going to crash, the military would send up search and rescue helicopters. The helicopters were following the craft. The craft experienced severe problems. It was thought that the craft was going to crash. However, this craft did not crash.
Here are two hypotheses. One, the UFO Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum saw was actually an aircraft developed by the United States government. Another possibility suggested by Falcon is that it was a craft given our government by extraterrestrials.